Effectively engaging the churches and society. That's the topic that I've been given in the area of creation care. And it seems to me, to begin with, there are three very large problems that we face in engaging the church and society. Willard has started us out by addressing two of them. And one of them is denial. I want to mention all three of them. Denial, despair, and then one that we haven't talked about so much, and that's indifference, which is perhaps related to both of them. Denial, as we know, is an enormous problem, and to give you a sense of how widespread it is, let me read from what is, I hope not your favorite newspaper, but one that you will read, and that's the National Post. My biases are showing up here. And I live on an island, and I read a lot on the ferries, and the only time I read newspapers is when I can salvage them from the recycle bins on the ferries, and I got a stack the other day, and there was a National Post in it, so I dutifully read it. Came across this editorial. This was on the day of Earth Hour. Remember Earth Hour, where you turn your lights off as an indication of the seriousness of the problem? The title of the headline is "Keep Your Lights On," of the editorial. The Earth Hour website claims that last year hundreds of millions of people in more than 4,000 cities and towns across 88 countries switched off their lights for 1 hour, creating a visual mandate for action on climate change. The website also offers this frightening warning. New economic modeling indicates the world has just 5 years to initiate a low-carbon industrial revolution before runaway climate change becomes almost inevitable. Good to see that, but it's in quotation marks, and you see the context in which it's placed. But Earth Hour is not designed to be scientific, rational, or even constructive. It's designed to inspire fear and assuage guilt. Feel-good activities, such as Earth Hour, primarily appeal to three constituencies, which one you fit into: the young, the idealistic, and those who would prey on their ignorance. The latter category includes politicians, climate change activists, and people with other agendas, specifically anti-capitalist, anti-growth, and anti-prosperity. We're all guilty, I suspect, here. And there's more. Indeed, the idea that we will progress by regressing is not only at the core of Earth Hour, but of the entire anti-climate change movement. If we lived, I don't quite understand that. If we lived simpler, more frugal, translation, less comfortable, less productive lives, the thinking goes we could take the planet back to a pristine state. Man is the problem, and he should scale back his activities. This rationale, we'll read one more paragraph, and then I'll release you. This rationale ignores the fact, I like this because sometimes I say this sort of, that a lot of people believe this sort of thing, and I accuse myself that it's a caricature, but it's not a caricature. This rationale ignores the fact that for every environmental concern humanity has experienced or engendered, it has also found a solution. Scrubbers remove particulate from smokestacks. Laws penalize and discourage water pollution. Private property ownership helps conserve wetlands. More efficient engines replace less efficient ones, saving fuel and reducing emissions. Well, denial is a huge issue, not just in the National Post, I'm afraid. And yet there, at the very end of the editorial, and things are complicated, there's a half-truth. And he says, these advances, let's see, ironically, it's the countries that lack these things that are unable to celebrate Earth Hour. Their citizens haven't achieved the prosperity necessary to benefit from an innovation that we take in the first world take for granted, universal electric light. Most people in the third world will spend Earth Hour in darkness as they do every day. Well, there is a half-truth there, I think, which we won't have to go into, but I think it points us to a point I tried to make last night, and that is the complexity of these issues and the danger of the feeling that I have as I read that editorial, and we all have as we groan at it, that we are the enlightened ones, we have it right, and there's a vast number of enemies out there and they've got it wrong. It's not nearly that simple. And to quote, not for the last time, Wendell Berry from that essay, Think Little, that I referred to this morning, written 40 years ago, in 1969. The environmental crisis rises closer to home. He's talking about other protest movements like anti-war and the civil rights movement. The environmental crisis rises closer to home. Nearly every one of us, nearly every day of his life, is contributing directly to the ruin of this planet. A protest meeting on the issue of environmental abuse is not a convocation of accusers, it is a convocation of the guilty. That realization ought to clear the smog of self-righteousness that has almost conventionally hovered over these occasions. I hope you haven't noticed any smog of self-righteousness, but it is a danger at occasions like this, and we need to recognize this. They're uncomfortable words, but they remind us of the need to not draw too thoroughly the line between the righteous and the sinners, because we're all sinners. Denial is one of the issues. Despair is another. I mentioned last night, it seems to me depression and suicide are major problems among radical environmentalists. And I want to come back to this because it does seem to me there is in the environmental movement generally a flawed understanding of human nature, which I think as a Christian I want to speak to. And I'll get back to that, but the deep ecology answer to environmental problems, as laid out by Arnie Nace 30, 40 years ago, and I have a lot of respect for deep ecology as a movement, says we need to change our understanding of what the self is. If we recognize that as individual selves, this is essentially a Buddhist idea, I think, we don't really have a self, we're part of the whole, then it's not even a moral issue anymore because we will recognize that we are necessarily caring for ourselves and caring for creation, and breathing isn't a moral question for us. We take our breath without thinking about it. Likewise, we will care for creation, because when we change our view and recognize that we are a part of the whole. Well, it doesn't work that way, I don't think. We are different. We're not just a part of the whole. We are that, but we stand out. There's something different about human beings, like it or not. We have consciousness and creativity like nothing else in creation. And that's both a curse and a blessing.